Oolong versus Sencha is a comparison a lot of people make, but in reality, these teas are quite different from one another. In this video, we're going to be comparing Sencha versus Oolong when it comes to production, taste, caffeine content, and more. Let's explore these two very different tea types and see what makes them alike and what makes them different. Before we get started, it would really mean a lot to us if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for future tea videos. We have hundreds of videos on all sorts of topics related to Japanese green tea, but for this episode, we're going to focus on Sencha and Oolong specifically. Without further ado, let's get started. First, what are Sencha and Oolong? Let's start with Sencha. Sencha is the most common type of Japanese green tea. It's made from the young sprouts on the top of the tea plant. After the leaves have been harvested, they are then steamed, rolled, and dried. The dried Sencha leaves take on this tightly rolled needle shape. This really locks in the flavor until it's ready to be released all at once into a glorious green infusion. The flavor of Sencha tea tends to be slightly sweeter compared to other green teas, with a hint of this grassy flavor and a citrusy astringency. So what about Oolong then? You may be familiar with green tea and black tea, but Oolong is a new tea for most. You can think of Oolong as somewhere in between a green tea and a black tea. While green tea is unoxidized and black tea is fully oxidized, Oolong tea is somewhere in the middle. The tea leaves are withered and rolled after harvest. The rolling process bruises the leaf and brings different enzymes to the surface. This accelerates the oxidation process as the inner leaf material is exposed to the oxygen. This is how Oolong tea gets a lot of its fruity or floral notes. A few hours later, the oxidation will need to be stopped by applying heat to the leaves. Oolong tea can also be charcoal baked, which will drastically impact the flavor, imparting more of these roasted notes onto the tea. Let's talk about the production of Sencha versus Oolong tea. During the production process, there are a few key differences that lead to the large disparity in flavor of Oolong versus Sencha. Let's cover a few of them briefly. First, the picking. Sencha tea tends to be made from the younger sprouts of the tea plant. These younger sprouts are thought to be the highest in nutrients and the smoothest and sweetest in flavor. Oolong, on the other hand, is made from the older tea leaves. Because there is so much work that goes into producing Oolong tea, the leaves don't matter quite as much as the flavor can be manipulated during the processing. When the tea leaves are picked, they will begin to oxidize immediately. This oxidation process can be stopped by applying heat, which deactivates the enzymes that cause oxidation. With a green tea like Sencha, it's so important to heat the leaves almost immediately after harvest, so they are able to maintain their fresher, more vegetal notes. Oolong tea, on the other hand, can be partially oxidized. Oolong tea, on the other hand, can be partially oxidized, so it doesn't need to be heated directly after harvest. This doesn't mean that the farmer can necessarily take all the time that they want, as each stage in the production process is still meticulously planned. When you look at Oolong tea and Sencha tea, you will notice right away that the two look very different. This has to do with how the tea leaves are rolled. Oolong teas are either rolled into a tight ball shape or more of a strip shape. Sencha tea, on the other hand, is tightly rolled into thin needle-shaped leaves. These both are ways to lock in the flavor of the teas until they are ready to be infused. What about the caffeine content of Oolong versus Sencha? Sencha will tend to have between 40 to 60 milligrams of caffeine per serving, while the amount of caffeine in Oolong tea can vary. Although Oolong is a very broad category of tea, an average cup may have about 36 milligrams of caffeine. The reason Oolong tea tends to have a lower caffeine content compared to Sencha has to do with the leaves that are used. In general, Sencha tends to be made from the younger leaves, and Oolong tea tends to be made from the older leaves. The tea plant produces caffeine as a defense mechanism to protect itself against insects. The younger, more tender leaves require more protection and therefore more caffeine. The older, tougher leaves don't need to produce as much caffeine as they are less vulnerable. This is one of the main reasons for the difference in caffeine between Oolong versus Sencha. How does Japanese Oolong compare to Sencha? While most Oolong tea comes from China, there are a few incredible Oolong teas produced in Japan. These Oolong teas tend to be lighter and more floral. After searching around Japan for the past few years, we've finally found an excellent Japanese Oolong tea produced by Miyazaki Sabo. This tea has flowery notes of lilac and jasmine, with a tiny bit of dried honey sweetness and a green apple astringency in the finish. We also have a great selection of Sencha teas. During our travels, we've met with dozens of farmers and sampled hundreds of different Sencha teas. We've ultimately decided on a handful of our favorites, and we're so happy to share them with all of you. These teas are all coming from different regions, tea farms, cultivars, and production styles. If you're looking for a good place to start, we recommend the Fukumushi Yamaga, a delicious deep steamed Sencha from Shizuoka with a powerful fruity and steamed vegetable flavor. It also works great as a cold brew. When you order tea from us, you're not only helping to support this channel, but also helping us to support the dozens of talented farmers we work with all around Japan. We believe that by sharing these farmers' stories and their teas with people all around the world, we can help to transition the tea industry into a more positive, sustainable direction. If you have any questions about Sencha or about green tea in general, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Until then, we'll see you next time.